Today we're going to be talking about the big rocks of the bench press. Setup, tension, and the bar path. So the first big rock of the bench press is the setup. Now for the setup, we're going to break it down into two positions. First, we're going to talk about the hand position and then talk about foot position. Now for the hand position, where we place our hands on the bar is going to greatly dictate what muscles we primarily use in the bench press. If you want to dive a little bit deeper into where the different hand positions on the bar affect different muscle recruitment and how they affect your training, we've done another great video on that already, so I'll get Donnie to drop that in the description box below. So all you need to know for hand position in this video is that for lifting the most weight possible, you want to place your hands in the position on the bar that's going to allow you to do that. This will affect touch point, but we're going to touch on that later in the video. For a competition standard bench press, for it to be deemed legal, you need to have your index finger on the ring at a minimum. Any wider than that, you are not allowed to bench press in that fashion. So the widest grip you can go is index finger on the rings. You can bring it in narrower, and again, wherever is strongest is the position you should place your hands on the bar. The reason you'll often see people opt for a wider grip when it comes to lifting the most weight on the bench press is because the wider our hands go, the less range of motion there is. And the less range of motion typically means you're gonna be able to move more weight. The next component of the setup is foot position. Now, foot position is all about maximizing leg drive. The greater you can drive your legs in a bench press, the more weight you'll be able to lift. And in a powerlifting context, lifting weight is everything. Depending on what federation you compete in, the rules will either state that your whole foot has to be down, which means your heel must be on the floor, or you can have your heels up. Again, you need to check this with the federation you're competing with. The goal of the leg drive in the bench press is to create a nice, stable and rigid body. This is going to allow for greater force transfer. Easier it is for forces to transfer through the body, then it'll be easier to lift more weight. The main cue that you want to be thinking about when it comes to leg drive is trying to spread your legs into the floor. Now you want to think of this as we're trying to create a knee extension moment, like on a leg extension. So in doing this and thinking about creating that leg extension moment, we're trying to engage our quads to drive our upper back into the bench and make us nice and stable and rigid on the bench. So you should feel lots of quad tension the whole time that you're bench pressing. A common mistake that we see with leg drive in the bench press is people opting to use a glute dominant leg drive. Now this can actually make your hips come up off the bench, which is not okay for a powerlifting bench press because you will get red lights. So this is why we here at Strength Culture prefer to cue a quad dominant leg drive. The final thing to note with the bench press leg drive is that foot position is going to be dependent on lifter to lifter, and that it might vary for some lifters. Some are going to prefer a wider stance, some prefer a narrower stance, some prefer having their feet further out from the bench, some prefer having them closer to their bum. This is something that we recommend you try different positions and see what works best for you. So the second big rock of the bench press is tension in the legs and in the upper back. So one question that often arises with leg drive is whether you want to opt for a constant leg drive or a dynamic leg drive. Now, a constant leg drive just means that you'll be constantly pushing the same amount of force through your legs the whole time. That includes the down phase of the bench and the up phase. Whereas a dynamic leg drive would see that on the down phase, you produce a little less leg drive, and then as you go to press off your chest, that's when you drive the legs nice and hard. We prefer a constant leg drive simply because it's one less variable that you have to control. The second component of building tension in the bench press is the upper back. So we're trying to simultaneously use the leg drive and the upper back tension by squeezing our shoulder blades together to, one, improve our arch and also create as much tension through the whole body. Another reason that we want to create as much upper back tension as possible is to help improve our arch. Now, having a greater arch means the chest is going to be higher to the bar, which means we're going to have to move the bar less overall. It'll also help by putting our shoulders into a better and safer position to lift massive loads. So one of the cues that you'd want to focus on when building upper back tension is just simply squeezing the shit out of your shoulder blades. You want to imagine that something's in between your shoulder blades and you're trying to pinch your shoulder blades together. This is a skill and something that you do need to learn over time, learning to control your scaps in a retracted position. You can easily do this by performing seated rows or any row variation. The final point to note with upper back tension is that building upper back tension is going to dictate the start of our lift. If we have a nice tight upper back where we're squeezing our shoulder blades, it's going to mean that our shoulders are pinned back and down, our chest is nice and high, and we're in a really good starting position. If our shoulder blades are nice and loose and we're not building that upper back tension, we're going to be in a bit of a poor and sloppy starting position. So you really need to nail your upper back tension every single time you bench press. This now leads on to our third and final point in the bench press, which is the bar path. By nailing your upper back tension and your leg tension, you're gonna be able to set yourself up to have a better bar path and a better overall bench press. The third and final big rock of the bench press is the bar path. Now, everything we've done in the previous two rocks is gonna contribute to bar path by setting the tension and setting the position that we are on the bench. The better the position, the better the bar path will be. Now, like we discussed before, where we place our hands on placement of the bar is going to affect our touch point, which is going to affect our bar path. When you have a wider bench press, we're going to see less of a J-curve bar path and a bit more of a straighter bar path compared to, say, a mid-grip bench press, which you see some of the big boys doing, where they touch a little bit lower and they have more of a pushback, more of a J-curve bar path. The reason that we typically want to see a J-curve or a pushback bar path in the bench press is because in order to touch the highest point on our chest to reduce the range of motion, we typically need to tuck and touch a little bit lower on our chest. So this means in order to put the pressing muscles into an advantageous position to get the weight back up, we actually need to push back initially so that we're engaging the pecs, the shoulders, the triceps to get the barbell up. So this is why when you touch, you initially want to see a bit of a pushback and then the bar path will start to straighten up. Another reason that we want to see a J-curve bar path in the bench press is because in order to safely hold the barbell at the top in the lockout position, we want the bar to be directly over our shoulders. If it's any further away, it starts to create what's called an unnecessary moment arm, and it can be actually put us at a disadvantage to lifting the most weight and put our shoulders in a pretty shit position. So in order to touch the highest point of our chest, we need to tuck, and then in order to finish, we actually want to finish over our shoulders. So if we draw a point between these two positions, it creates a J or a diagonal bar path. Now, when it comes to the bench press, we want to make sure that our wrists and elbows are stacked underneath the bar. Now, this means that if we have a wider grip, to keep our elbows stacked under the bar and our wrists stacked under the bar, we're going to have to touch a little bit higher. Whereas with a more narrow grip, to keep that stacked position, we have to naturally tuck. And when we tuck, we start to get a bit more of a J-curve bar path on the way up. So the final thing to touch on when it comes to the bench press is not directly a big rock, but the equipment that you want to use in the bench press. So a few pieces of equipment that I like to use myself and that a lot of our lifters here at Strength Culture like to use is wrist wraps. Wrist wraps are simply placed around the wrists to help stabilize and support the wrist when under heavy loads. We can see that our wrists don't naturally have a lot of musculature, so having some external support can help when you're pressing big weights on the barbell. Question that we often get as well is a belt. I personally like to use the belt. It helps create intra-abdominal pressure. Can sometimes affect your arch a little bit, and some people will find that it does affect their arch having a belt. They can't get as much of an arch. So again, this is something that you as the individual should try. I personally like to use the belt. SBD, if you're looking for the SBD products, City Strength in Sydney, please hit them up. And finally, the last question is what shoes to wear. Now, you do have to wear shoes if you are competing in powerlifting. If you're not competing in powerlifting, you can just train barefoot. Some people like to wear heels. The heels allow them to get their feet a little bit further under the bench. Again, like we discussed before, foot position can help with tension. It can help improve your arch. So again, trying heels or flats is something that is up to the individual, and you will need to try both out. But you can wear heels in the bench press. So that's it for the big rocks of the bench press. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, share the content, and as always, happy lifting.